This is my turf in the New Horizons brand. This is it. What we call the Premium Cybersecurity Certification, CISSP, the concentrations under CISSP, their cloud computing credentials from ISACA, like the auditing credential, the security management credential, the certified ethical hacker, and the forensic credential from EC Council. We are partners of these organizations, and this is what I do based on decades out in the field doing this type of work and getting knocked around a bit in certification exams. I wish I could tell you that in the 61 certification exams that are IT related that I have passed so far, I'm 61 for 61. No, I have been absolutely beaten up and left bloody by some of the certification exams. I've had to take some of these a few times in a row to get it right. And I've probably learned more from the failures on the exams than I have learned from my successes on the exams. I can tell you this, I am 4 for 4 on the exams from ISC squared. And the circumstance in which I got my original CISSP is a little unusual compared to what we do now in CISSP. I got my CISSP in 2008. I went to take the exam. This was back in the days of the paper-based CISSP exam. Scantron sheet and a big test question booklet, 250 questions, and you had 6 hours to take that exam. It's a different format these days, and we'll tell you about that format. Well, I managed to squeeze into a sold-out test session that was set up for the benefit of primarily military personnel in Huntsville, Alabama, at the Redstone Arsenal. And that's a bit of a drive from here in Nashville, Tennessee, but that's a reasonable drive. So got stuck behind a big wreck on the way down to the test session the night before, was delayed leaving work, got delayed in traffic, really nasty weather, finally got checked into the hotel and just collapsed, ready to go take the exam the next day with my head full of CISSP knowledge from my own self-study. The power went out at the hotel, reset the alarm clock. I did not get my wake-up call. I woke up in a panic, had to drive to the test session with no prep, wearing what I wore the night before, no breakfast, no coffee, just went in and took it cold. And so we had about 157 people in their BDUs. I was in a Grateful Dead t-shirt and a Budweiser hat, and I felt a little bit out of place in that test session. And this is back in the days when you did not know immediately if you passed the exam because it was on paper. So sweated it out over the holiday break. Finally, I got the email and they followed up with a postal letter from ISC squared. Congratulations, Mr. Tibb, you passed the exam. Now let's walk you through the process for actually getting the credential. You fill out the application, you describe your experience in 2 of the 8 domains. We'll check your references. Fine. Got the credential. Well done. So that's the thing that got me out of the server room. I was an IT practitioner with a lot of security responsibility, but I was having trouble getting out of the server room. I was having trouble with the positioning of me as something other than an IT practitioner who just happened to have a lot of security experience. So the CISSP really is the thing that just busted it wide open for me. And I have come to call it the price of admission. It's the hot ticket, really, for getting a position in information security management. You must think like a manager while you are in the CISSP exam. If you think like a technician, if you think like a typical systems administrator, this generally is not going to end well. And another piece of advice that I give in a CISSP class to ease your mind about taking the exam: when you go in to take the exam, which is a computer-based exam these days, it's no longer on a Scantron sheet and a test question booklet. It's an adaptive exam these days that you take on a computer workstation. And we'll tell you about that in some detail before we're done today. When you sit down to take that CISSP exam, I need you to put yourself in this frame of mind. Pretend that you are a consultant in information security management. And this is a job interview. You have been paid to sit down and give advice for 3 hours to management in a company that really needs help, not just with their information security needs, but a variety of security needs. You really do become that internal consultant when you get hired as the CISSP, probably with a job title like security manager, chief information security officer, you really do become that internal consultant on a variety of security matters. So this is what we will do today. I'll show you some content from selected domains. There are 8 domains in the current exam. We will give you a little sample of the content that we use in the training. If you come to take a CISSP class with us at New Horizons, it's typically going to be a 5-day experience, and we can customize this. If we need to bring CISSP training to your location, we'll do this according to your time frame. If you show up in online live or in the live room with us at your local New Horizons facility, generally it's going to be a 5-day experience. So I'm going to show you some content that we use from 4 of the 8 domains. We will do a few practice questions as well, time permitting, because I want to make sure that you are comfortable with the look and feel and format and level of reasoning that it takes to do well on the real exam. So one of the pieces of feedback that I get from people who have been through this experience with me, weeks, even months after a class, somebody goes to take the CISSP exam, they get back in touch. Hey, Mr. Tibb, just wanted to let you know I passed. Excellent. Years after that experience, sometimes a year or 2, I will get a call. I will get a note on Twitter. Somebody will ping me. They'll email me and, hey, Mr. Tibb, this is Jane at SPIFCO International. Just wanted to let you know I am now the Chief Information Security Officer at SPIFCO International, and I make more money than you, loser. Click. I love getting those calls. I want to smooth the path for you. I want you to have an easier time with this than I did. I didn't have a class, didn't have a coach, didn't have a mentor, did not have a guide to the CISSP body of knowledge when I got started with this. So whatever I can do to help you get there, this is my job. This is what I do. This is my full-time gig with New Horizons. So look at a little of the official language from ISC Squared. They say, become a CISSP, Certified Information System Security Professional. Why do we do this? They say you're going to accelerate your cybersecurity career. That's true. This is the price of admission, typically, to information security manager types of positions. But there's an even bigger issue if you are associated with, or I would say affiliated with, the Defense Department. If you are in the military right now on active duty, or you're in the reserves, or perhaps working for a defense contractor, maybe a bit of both. You are in the military planning your transition out of the military back into the civilian workforce. You know what this is all about, your 8570 requirements, the 8570.1 doctrine that says cybersecurity is so important to national security. Our dear uncle has published this list of credentials that they want you to get. You don't have to get all of them, obviously, but if you're going to qualify at a variety of levels for promotions and salary bumps and similar things, they specify there is a group of certification exams that you should look at. Get those credentials and qualify for the greater opportunity. Well, if we run the numbers on this 8570 illustration, boom, 5 times the CISSP shows up in the list. The only thing close to that is certified ethical hacker from our dear friends at EC Council. And yes, we can train you for that as well. In fact, we can train you for all of this stuff, or at least most of them. So you see the language from DOD. This is CISSP or associated. We need to qualify this. It's really important. We get this question all the time from nervous people who are pursuing CISSP credentials. I think I can master the material, good class and all of that, good training, but I don't have the experience level. They say they're looking for a certain number of years of experience in 2 of the 8 domains. Okay, you do not have to have had the words security manager in your title. If you have been a network administrator, a systems administrator, if you've had anything to do with auditing and investigations, if you've had any position in any legitimate IT environment where you have been responsible for defense of the network, defense of the systems, you've been responsible for defending the people who work in those information systems, you probably qualify. If you've been doing this for a few years. And if not, there are some ways to substitute some other things. ISC Squared will give you some credit for your Security Plus credential from CompTIA. which is going to be a little easier to get than the CISSP. If you have several credentials from a variety of legitimate certification vendors, some of those things may count toward the experience level. And if you can't provide that, okay, there's another way to get this done. You become an associate of ISC squared once you have passed the exam if you do not have the experience level. But what we see in class and what we see as we walk people through this process over and over is somebody says, I'm going to have to do this associate route because I don't have the experience. I've been working in the help desk. I've been doing tech support. I've been doing these techie chores in my network, but I've not really managed information security. Perhaps you have, and it just has not formally been in your job description. So we will walk you through that process. We show you how to determine that you either are currently qualified for the CISSP or you are on the way to getting qualified for your CISSP. So if you're not, we will call that the associate role, and you're just waiting for that calendar to flip, and then you get your credentials. So we will walk you through that process. In real world terms, why would you pursue the CISSP? Cha-ching. Right before we went live, I went to monster.com. I just picked one of the online job boards. There's Monster, there's Career Builder, there's Dice, there's Indeed, there's LinkedIn Jobs. Just pick the one that works best for you. Pick multiples. Type in CISSP in the search box with no location. Hit the search. This morning, 6,289 companies have listed jobs where they want a CISSP. And sometimes they're looking for multiple CISSPs. It really is the hot ticket. And I can tell you, just from my experience with this is the credential that got me out of the server room and put me on the path to become the world's busiest instructor of this material. So it's a lot of opportunity out there. Probably about 1 million positions currently unfilled. It really is a seller's market for this type of talent. And if I were involved in the hiring decisions, if I were hiring an information security manager and I have two equally qualified candidates, one of them has put the work in, gone through a self-study process or gone through a class, gone through some training, and they go and get this credential, and the other equally qualified candidate has not, guess whose resume is going to the top of the stack? Human resources directors and similar pros are always guided to look for these types of credentials. CISSP, CISM, Certified Ethical Hacker. It shows that you are willing to do the work. This is not an easy credential to get, but I can tell you, 61 times so far as I have sat down and knocked out a certification exam and gotten the certificate, this is the one that has paid off more than any other for me. This is the thing that just busted it wide open, got me out of the server room, and got on the current path. So it is worth the effort, my friends. We are going to look at some content from 4 of the 8 domains. The content will go by fairly quickly on the shared screen. Do not worry about screenshotting what you're about to see. A recording will be made available that you can stop and start and pause. We're just going to give you a representative sample of some content. But before we do that, I want to show you a typical question, just in the same look and feel and format and level of reasoning that you might see on the real exam. The thing that I do when I teach a CISSP class online, live, or in the live classroom, or even at your location, we can do that. I always bring with me an up-to-date set of practice questions. And if you're in the class, we put the entire class on the spot under significant time pressure and ask you to read. We read them out loud. We analyze the questions. We want you to get in this frame of mind. I know why the right answer is right, and I know why the wrong answers are wrong. That's the confidence level that you need to be able to conquer this exam. So let's just look at a representative sample. A disclaimer, obviously, this is not a real question from the real exam. We can't do that. That's cheating. That's brain dumping. And your exam vendors are aware that brain dumping is happening. They will go to eBay and find these clowns that are offering PDFs where they claim they are giving you real exam content. Those things are loaded with bogus answers, and your exam vendors are doing a thing called exam forensics these days. They have ways of knowing that somebody has purchased the inappropriate content. They alter the question slightly to trip you up. What used to be the correct answer is no longer the correct answer. They'll leave the old busted answer in, and you could even have your certification canceled, no refunds if they catch you cheating. So nobody in this group obviously is going to do that. We're going to do this the right way by learning the content. So let me show you a representative sample of a practice question. Kind of looks and feels like the real thing. You certainly would be expected to be tested on this topic. Does this resemble a real question from the real test? Yes. I'm not going to get in trouble, and I'm not going to get you in trouble by giving you real content from the real exam. But if you take the test, you could see something kind of looks like this. A security manager, that's you, is reviewing an organization's information security policy, which requires encryption of all data placed on a USB drive. The policy also requires that a specific encryption algorithm be used. So which of the following algorithms would provide the greatest assurance that data placed on USB drives is protected from unauthorized disclosure? And they give you a multiple choice option set. It's always going to be a minimum of 4 things. Sometimes it's 5 or 6 or even more, and you have to make your best guess from what's available. So if you were in a CISSP class with me, or one of my talented colleagues, or you pursued some training on your own, some self-study, you would be absolutely drilled. If the materials are good, you would be absolutely beaten up with content about cryptography. It is a really big part of the exam these days. And in fact, that's one of the key pieces of feedback that we get weeks or months after a class. Somebody will get in touch. Hey, Mr. Tibb, you were right. Thank you for wearing us out about encryption, because cryptography was all over the CISSP exam. Yeah, that's true. So look at your options. We're trying to protect that data on USB drives. I have the data encryption standard, we'll call that DES, secure hash algorithm of a couple of different flavors, an SHA-1 and an SHA-256. I have AES, the advanced encryption standard. I have secure shell, and I have an RSA-32. All right, if we have learned this stuff correctly in class or through some self-study, we should be able to spot the bogus, incorrect answer. It cannot possibly be true because it's not actually a thing. So we'll take a couple of things off the table. In fact, let me get my marker. We will go line through RSA-32. That's called a distractor answer. You might know the initials RSA, Revest, Shamir, and Edelman. Some of the pioneers of cryptography, their initials are attached to a company. One of the major players in encryption is called RSA. In fact, it's one of the major security vendors. Perhaps you've been to or heard of the RSA conference. Perhaps you've used the RSA Secure ID, that little widget that gets you into the network. So RSA is a real thing, but there's no such thing as RSA-32. That's a distractor answer. So option F is off the table. What about your secure hash algorithms? SHA-1, is that a thing? Yes, it is. But we're not talking about hashing. We're talking about encryption of data at rest. So both of my non-reversible encryptions, calculating hash values, 2 different flavors of secure hash algorithm, those are off the table. Now we've got it down to 3 out of a possible 6 answers. What about secure shell? Is that a thing? Did I make that up? Nope. Secure shell is an encryptable replacement for an old busted standard called Telnet. And one of the things that I will ask you to write down in your notes when you come to class, or we're just talking about this stuff, I'll say, stop using Telnet. Please, Telnet is busted. You cannot protect anything in Telnet. Your password and other valuable things will be exposed if you use Telnet. Somebody doing packet sniffing on your network with Wireshark or some similar free utility will be able to get your stuff. So secure shell, as good as it is off the table because it's not the right type of encryption. We're looking for encryption at rest. Secure shell is for encryption in transit. So we've taken 4 things off the table. We've got it down to a coin flip at this point. My correct answer will be the data encryption standard or the advanced encryption standard. It must be one of those 2. The people who put your exam together have tried to confuse you and mislead you by putting these other answers in. It's got to be one of those two types of encryption at rest. So if you come to class or if you pursue this knowledge on your own, you will get some knowledge of the timeline of encryption. Once upon a time, we used this real thing called DES, the Data Encryption Standard, in the federal environment to protect sensitive but unclassified information. And we had this thing called DES forever. It was awesome. The first time I saw DES, I said, whoa, this is a game changer. This is good stuff. Somebody cracked it. The Electronic Freedom Foundation put a bunch of off-the-shelf computer hardware together, and they cracked DES in 4.5 days. Does that make them evil criminal hackers? Nope. I'm glad they cracked this federal standard for encryption because it showed us this is not reliable. We need to do something better. So the federal logic of that era said, okay, we got this busted thing. NIST says don't use it anymore. I would hope at this point in your career you are aware of NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's our friendly feds in the Commerce Department. So NIST says stop using this busted thing. And the other feds said, oh, clever, let's double it. Let's do double DES. And double DES was awful. Triple DES, that's the solution. We're going to encrypt, change the keys, encrypt again, change the keys, encrypt again. And we're going to adjust the cipher. We're going to adjust the algorithm. So we're going to do this busted thing 3 times. And that was the federal logic of that era. And of course, triple DES got cracked. You'd see that as 3 DES. Well, the feds in charge of all of this, the National Security Agency and NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology at the Commerce Department, said, enough is enough. We're not going to keep repeating this broken thing. We've got to do better. So they announced a competition. Hey, geeks, hackers, mathematicians, cryptographers, engineers, academics, bring us your best algorithm to replace this busted federal standard called DES. And made the best algorithm win. And a lot of smart folks submitted their algorithms for the thing to replace DES. And my favorite Belgians won the competition. Joan and Vince, love them. And they brought it. And their cipher became known as the Advanced Encryption Standard. We actually use a Belgian cipher that won the competition. So this gets distributed to the federal government of the United States, and Uncle Sam puts the word out, hey, folks, we have a new standard for encrypting sensitive but unclassified information. Anybody can use this. It is in the public domain forever and ever, amen, and we will call it the Advanced Encryption Standard. Now, will the CISSP exam actually make it this easy? They will not. What they'll do on the test typically is just give you the acronyms. You would have to know that AES is the Advanced Encryption Standard. You'd have to know that DES is the Data Encryption Standard. You'd have to know that some of these things are real and they are not. And you'll have to get that level of knowledge from the acronyms. So if you take CISSP training with me or any of my other qualified colleagues, we are going to wear you out about acronyms, because your confidence level goes way up when you are given a list of acronyms and somebody who has been there and done that says, learn these. We're going to give you flashcards and we're going to guide you through the process of learning the acronyms that we know will be testable. And it is a predictable arrangement of acronyms. It is a predictable arrangement of definitions that you need to know. And we're just going to wear you out with that knowledge. Repetition is the mother of skill in this case. And there is a lot of chatter out there in a variety of test prep communities. You can find some CISSP test prep communities on Facebook and a variety of other platforms. And sometimes the information in those communities is correct. Sometimes it is not. The most recent CISSP class for me, which was last week, we had a participant who was looking over some prep stuff on Facebook, and we're just chatting about this stuff in the group. And he says, Mr. Tibb, I saw on Facebook from a CISSP expert that there is a question pool of 800 questions. And the 100 to 150 questions on your exam will come from that question pool of 800 questions. No, there is a test question pool of thousands upon thousands of possible questions, and there's no way to predict which questions you are going to get. So we can predict the topics that you will get on the exam because ISC Squared does publish lists of the topics. They'll publish exam outlines, and we will show you how to acquire those exam outlines. So there's no big surprise once you get to the exam. You know in advance which topics are in the domains, so you know what to study. They're not going to make it easy for you. There will be little tricks of vocabulary. There will be tricks in the structure of the questions. There will be misleading things like RSA 32. RSA is a legitimate technology vendor. They're all over the cybersecurity space, so that must be a real thing, right? RSA 32. Nope, totally bogus. I made it up to confuse you and mislead you because they will actually do that on the real test. So we'll show you some practice questions in addition to what we see here before we're done. I do want to take you on a little tour through some of the domains. So if we back up to this, we see that there are 8 domains: security and risk management, asset security, that architecture and engineering domain is huge. Communication and network security, typical day at the life for a network administrator, identity and access management, security assessment and testing, security operations, and software development security. You will be tested on the exam on these domains in those weights. So security and risk management is the biggest domain. There's more content from that than there is anything else on the exam. Software development security, not so much these days. There are a few topics that you need to know, obviously. Asset security gets a small piece of this. So I'm going to show you some sample content from 4 of the 8 domains. This is some of the material that we would use in class if you were in a CISSP class, which generally runs 5 days. We can customize that for you if necessary. We can even take this class to your location if that's what it takes to get this job done. Jesse, let me call something to your attention. I am trying to clear those lines where I marked some things out, and it does not appear that I actually have control of that.
Let me make you the host so that I clear that.
Those lines will be distracting. I'm glad I didn't drive a smiley face. Or let's see, clear all drawings. Excellent. All right. So that looks good. Let us walk you through a little bit of content. And again, do not worry about screenshotting these things. Don't try to write down the things that you see on the screen. This stuff will go by at a fairly rapid clip. A recording will be made available. So you're getting free content basically from our CISSP classes. We can't drop all of it on you in a little webcast, but we do want to get you acquainted with some of this stuff. So at a fairly rapid clip, let's talk about a few of these things. First of all, a fundamental piece of the exam is all about access control. Sounds complicated. It is not. This is the day in the life for the typical system administrator, network administrator. Sometimes security administrators get involved in this. Well, why would we quiz you in the CISSP exam on something that is not part of a day in the life in the occupation of a security administrator? If you are the chief information security officer, I hope you have gotten out of the server room. I hope you are not on the help desk or tech support anymore, where the number one request of those technologists who respond to user issues, it's passwords. I changed my password. The system told me I had to change my password and I didn't write it down. Can you give me my password, admin? No, I don't know your password. Administrators do not keep big lists of passwords. What we could do is assist that user in resetting a password. Is that something we do as CISSPs? Maybe, depending upon the structure of your exam, or the structure of your organization. The ideal scenario would be you're the chief information security officer. You've got your CISSP, and that is your ticket to the big show. You're not changing passwords. You're not rolling your sleeves up doing techie chores, but you should maintain some oversight of the process. And one of the things that will keep a CISSP busy on the job when there's not an incident to respond to on those days when you're not getting hacked, when there's not some emergency to respond to in a business continuity or disaster recovery or investigative type of activity, when it is just the typical day at the office for a CISSP, we would expect that you are involved in a couple of different types of audits. We have account audits and we have software audits. You're probably not a full-time auditor if you're also the information security manager. That is a separation of duties issue. But typical day at work, you're probably involved in checking permissions. And this is all going to be based on access control. So the exam, and this is quoted right out of the CISSP body of knowledge. And by the way, when I say CISSP body of knowledge, this is it. This is a 1,500-page book published by the folks who put your exam together. That's where this content comes from. We don't give you a 1,500-page book and say, read this. We have a more civilized way to do this, and it's what you see here. So in this context, access control is about allowing authorized entities to observe or modify or take possession of a system or even some physical property or perhaps the knowledge contained within that system. And we'll always break this down to two entities. The subject is the entity requesting the access. The object is the thing being accessed. And in the usual tech support type of context, it's a person. I need to get access to this file in the file share. I need to get to this thing in the cloud. I need this thing out of SharePoint or the database. I can't get to it. Can you help me? Usually that's a tech support type of issue. We don't have to get personally involved in that, but we do have to make sure that the settings are correct. If some subject is accessing an object that they are not supposed to access, we have to figure out why that happened, and we need to correct that situation. Easy to do when this is a person. It's not always a person. A system could be the subject. A process could be the subject. If you, the person, file up, click the icon for your web browser, and you're going to www.yourawesomecompany.com, and we're going to look over the website and maybe even buy something from that company. You are the subject. The website contained in that web server is the object. Okay. You have accessed the thing, but at a certain point, when you decide, I want to buy this thing, SPIFCO International has these widgets that I've been looking for, so I want to do this transaction. Here's my credit card. Here's my information. Send me the thing. Not so fast. The web server does not contain that information. That's contained in a database, a relational database management system, probably a piece of equipment in the same place at the same time as that web server. It doesn't have to be. They could be separated. In fact, they could even be in the same machine. I don't recommend that you do it that way. But that web server that was the object being accessed now becomes the subject accessing the object, which is the database. And that could even take on a new role as we hand a transaction off to a payment gateway for processing. So that's a fundamental thing that we just drill you on in a CISSP class, because it is all over the exam in any of those discussions of access control. These roles of subject and object are not permanent roles. They can flip according to the circumstance in which they're used. So our job is to have some oversight, limiting the subject's objects to the access of the object using predefined rules and roles and labels. Role-based access control and similar things could be used for that. On the exam, you would expect to see the acronym I and A, identification and authentication. They will not always spell this out. We provide unique identifiers for every authorized subject attempting to access an object. So if you are in a Windows domain, for example, using Active Directory to identify people, you might use first name dot last name or first initial last name. Sometimes it's your email address that gets you into the system. We just have to make sure that those things are unique. If you have a John Smith and a Jane Smith and a Joan Smith, you cannot use J Smith at spifco.com. That would apply to more than one person. When I was researching my father's service in the American military, my dad was a very young GI. He was drafted into the Army Air Corps. in World War II, and he served in Europe. And I was fascinated by my father's service in World War II when I was a kid. And he didn't talk about it much. He did not come home complete, but he did his time. He served with courage and got the job done and helped win the war in Europe. Awesome. So as a kid, I am fascinated by my father's service in World War II, and I did a social studies project based in military records, which were rather primitive at the time. We didn't have the cloud or anything else to help with this. So I have these interactions with the VA and folks in the Pentagon, and I'm hunting down a variety of records associated with my father's service in World War II to surprise him with these things. And in my discussions, and I'm 10 years old at this point, having these grown up discussions with the VA and others. And in researching my father's service in World War II, somebody in the VA having this polite conversation with this 10-year-old kid let me know and showed me the evidence that this was true. They let me know that they had records of 11,000 John Smiths, 11,241 people whose first name was John and last name was Smith. And they had records, enlistment records and other service records going all the way back to the Revolutionary War, as long as they have been keeping records, even before we actually officially had a country. They've got access to some of those things, and they counted up over 11,000 John Smiths. Obviously, first initial J, last name Smith, is not going to work for identification and authentication. Okay, how about first name, last name? First name dot last name as an identifier, that's fine until you get more than one John Smith. And our uncle has 11,000 John Smiths to keep track of over the centuries. So we have to make sure that we have unique identifiers. You might throw numbers, you might throw middle initials, and a variety of other things into the mix. And if you ask the typical participant in the typical corporate environment, what's actually happening when they sit down at the keyboard and they type in, here's my username, here's my password, describe that process for me, Wally. And Wally says, okay, I type in my username and my password, and my combination of username and password goes down the hall to a magic box called a server, whatever that is. And that magic box called the server looks at my name, looks at my password, and says, that's Wally's password. This must be Wally. Come on in, get access to the network. Okay, thanks. Is that what actually happens? Of course not. We know better as technologists. We're not sending plain text passwords down the network. In fact, the typical server doesn't even read the password. There is a hash value in place of the password. There's tickets for authentication of the network. There's a variety of ways to get this done. And one of those fundamental assumptions behind the CISSP is that if your user, who's a non-technical user in your network, if they give you that explanation and it's wrong, well, clearly you can't use that on the exam. But part of the philosophy behind all of this is that a little bit of mystery is fine. If this is a non-technical user who believes the server is reading their password in plain text, that's okay with me. Let's maintain a little mystery about this, because the more the non-technical user understands about this, the more likely they are to get into a bit of trouble. So if Wally thinks his password is really going to the server, that's okay. We have to know that it is a different method, obviously. So we'll use identity management systems, supportive directories, Active Directory in Windows these days with a lightweight directory access protocol, pretty solid. You'll see terms like authorization and audit and accountability on the exam. These things that all begin with a capital letter A will generally be bundled up into multiple choice questions together to confuse you and mislead you. So we have to get this distinction between authentication and authorization. Authentication answers the question, do you belong here? Are you part of this network? Are you one of the entities that we expected to log in to this system and access things on the network? And we do that with unique identifiers. Authentication is not the same as authorization. Authentication answers the question, do you belong here? Authorization answers the question, what can you do here? Now that we have validated your identity with a bare minimum of a username and a password, maybe even a token, the RSA Secure ID token, the common access card that you might use at work if you are in the military or perhaps a contractor. You have that with you all the time, that digital version of your identity that has some public key infrastructure in it. Digital certificates are encoded into those smart cards, and that card has to be in place for certain types of transactions to happen. That is part of authentication. We have to look at that identity, and the system has to be smart enough, say, you can get to this thing and work with this resource because you have the right credentials. Somebody else who has a similar credential, but not the same level of clearance or not the same level of trust in the network, cannot get to this thing and do anything with it. You might be granted the right to read from a resource, but not write to it. You might be given the right to access a spreadsheet, maybe in a financial context. You can put numerical data into the spreadsheet, but you can't change any of the formulas in the spreadsheet. Those are the types of things that are determined by authorization rather than authentication. And quietly behind the scenes, we reserve the right to audit. We will look at log entries. You might even have a smart piece of software called an SIEM, Security Information and Event Management System. You may know the brand names like Splunk and Alien Vault and similar products that will call things to your attention quietly behind the scenes, say, hey, admin, check this out. There was an inappropriate attempt at access to this resource. The junior accounting clerk tried to do something that only the finance manager should be able to do. It doesn't necessarily mean there has been malicious activity, but I have to go check that out. I've got to engage that finance director in some conversation. Hey, Wally, the junior accounting clerk, attempted to do this thing. That finance director might just wave me off and say, yeah, that's okay. I went to lunch. I was detained. This thing had to be done. So I let Wally log in and get this. Oh, well, you've got a bigger issue there. We can control this with our directory services. So it all comes down to this final bullet point: accountability. We have the obligation to review contents of log files where every subject identifier has to be unique to relate activities to one subject. And that's a pretty common question on the exam. There is a rather ugly scenario that you need to look out for involving shared credentials. The senior accounting clerk says to the junior accounting clerk, I'm going to lunch. I've got some shopping to do. I may be delayed if I'm not back in an hour. Here's my username. Here's my password. Log in as me and continue this activity. Whoops, we now have a shared credential, and this is going to be used in financial services, human resources, a variety of other contexts. This is bad. When it happens in an IT context, this is awful. Above all other positions in the organization, the one that would scare me the most if I saw a shared credential would be somebody in IT with the authority to install software, remove software, make adjustments to security controls. This is awful if we can't figure out who actually did this, because we have to be able to hold people responsible for their actions. So that is the access control value of accountability. This is a pretty common topic on the exam. The way that we do access control administration could be centralized, decentralized, or hybrid. It's a big issue these days for obvious reasons. If there is a public health crisis and parts of the country are under lockdown and there's contagious diseases wreaking havoc, giving people the opportunity to work from home is a good option to offer. I've been working from home since 2010, and I appreciate the ability to do that. Decentralized access control administration is the one that will better meet the needs of those people out in the field. If you have branch offices, satellite offices, the group of New Horizons computer learning centers that I work for, we're all over the Southwest. We're in San Diego, we're in Tucson, we're in Las Vegas, we're in Reno, we're bunch of locations in California, and we are managed out of a facility in Anaheim. So those administrators in Anaheim give us the authority out here in the field to get the job done with a decentralized form of administration. That commute for me, Nashville to Anaheim, that's 2,000 miles. I do that when I have to, but I don't do that very often. So I appreciate the decentralized access control that is allowed. Jesse and I are probably about 2,000 miles apart if you look at it on the map, and still we can get together here in this platform and do this thing. The opposite of that is centralized. We're not really concerned about meeting the needs of individual business units, traveling employees, people working from home. If it's centralized access control, this is the scenario where people all come to work in one big corporate location. Rarely would you find somebody out in the field. People may travel from time to time. You give them virtual private networks. Somebody works from home because of medical reasons. Okay. But most of the folks will show up at the big corporate headquarters where you have one massive domain, like a Windows server type of domain. You use Active Directory and you can enforce group policies. You will get much tighter control over those security issues in the centralized network. So this exam will give you a little scenario, and your options could be centralized, decentralized, or hybrid, which is the best of both worlds. You have the big corporate headquarters and you have satellite offices, business units out in the field. Well, I told you just a little while ago that you're going to get a minimum of 4 multiple choice options. Some are 5 or 6 or 7 multiple choice options, but this exam always gives you a minimum of 4 things to choose from. So what are they going to do? Centralized, decentralized, hybrid, and they will throw in a 4th option that looks and sounds real, and it is not real. They'll say flexible, or they'll say dynamic. They'll pick some word from elsewhere in the CISSP body of knowledge. They'll pick a word out of this 1,500-page book that sounds like it could be a form of access control administration without being the real thing. That is a distractor answer. So if you know enough to eliminate the distractor answer, you have a 1 out of 3 chance of getting it right if you have to guess. Usually you get it down to a coin flip where you have 2 things that are opposites. If it is centralized, it can't be decentralized, and vice versa. So you very often see that. That's a thing that I call the pattern. There's no name for it. It's just a thing I noticed fairly early in ISE squared exams, and you see it in other exams as well. You take 2 things away because they just don't fit. Maybe one of them is an obviously wrong answer. One of them maybe is bogus. It's made up. It's a distractor. 2 things go away. The 2 things that are left in the multiple choice option sets are opposites. If A is true, B is false. If B is true, A is false. If you know your stuff, if you take your prep obligation seriously, you do not really need a coin flip. You should know enough to be able to choose the correct answer. Are you going to get some wrong on the real exam? Absolutely, you will. I have not gotten perfect scores on my certification exams. You will not either. There is a scale of 1,000 points available on the exam. 700 is the passing score. Now, the one thing we cannot do with the exam these days, because it's an adaptive format, we can no longer quote a number of questions that you have to get right. Once upon a time, we had the 250 question CISSP exam, and you knew that if you got 187 questions correct out of 250, that's your 70%, you would pass the exam. These days, the exam is adaptive. And it's really important in advance that you know what we mean by an adaptive format, so there are no unpleasant surprises. The adaptive format of the exam gives you tough questions at the beginning of the exam. And they'll really wear you out with those tough questions. A few of them are performance-based, drag and drop, point and click. If you have taken Security Plus from CompTIA, Network Plus, your Cisco exams, you've seen some of those performance-based questions where you actually have to take the mouse and do something. There's a few of those. They're pretty tough. And you generally see those at the beginning of the exam. There's no guarantee that they'll be at the beginning of the exam. And then once they start with the multiple choice questions, that will be the bulk of the questions. The really tough questions go at the beginning. So if they give you a tough question about access control at the beginning of the exam, and you get that one right, and you get a few more tough questions about access control right, the little engine that runs the exam, the algorithm behind all of this says, oh, clever, you really know your stuff about access control because you've answered some tough questions. We tried to trip you up and confuse you and mislead you by putting bogus information into the multiple choice option set. You correctly eliminated those. You chose from what was left and you got it right. We're going to back off a bit on access control. You've proven you know your stuff about access control, so we're going to move on to another topic. Well, what if you did not get the question correct? The algorithm that runs the exam says, Okay, you fell for it. We tried to trick you on this access control thing. Successfully, we tricked you. So let's give you an easier question about access control that will be worth fewer points. All of this is done on a scale, and the justification for scaling in your CISSP and similar exams is the same reason we scale in academic exams like the ACT or the SAT. They cannot quote a number to say, you have to get this many correct, because it's a variable number based on how well you do in the tough questions at the beginning of the exam. That's going to determine how many questions you get. You will get between 100 and 150 questions. There's no longer a solid number that we can quote. Therefore, we cannot quote a number that you have to get correct. And we'll show this to you on the ISC Squared website before we're done. So the justification for scaling your score is this. If two people are taking the exam at the same time, imagine you have gone into the test center. You can come to us at New Horizons. We always appreciate that, or we can find some other place for you to take the exam that's more convenient for you. So there you are in the test center. Someone else is taking the CISSP at the same time. They'll make sure that you sit apart. You get a tough question about access control, and that other person taking the exam gets a really easy question about access control. It's not fair to give you the same number of points. You will be rewarded for answering the tough question correctly. You get more points than the person who answered the easy question. And then they'll get a tough question on something else, and you'll get an easy question on something else. So they will get more points. So that's how we scale the scores. And when I say we, I don't mean we personally at New Horizons. We don't make this exam. It comes from ISC Squared, but we can administer that exam for you. The scaling evens out the process and makes it fair. There is a test question pool of thousands of possible questions, some of which are easier than others, some of which are harder than others. So you'll get a mix of easy and tough questions, and you'll get more credit for answering the tough questions. So eventually, the exam engine shuts you down and says, sorry, you're mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. You cannot get enough of these correct to get a passing score. Or it realizes that you know your stuff, and at a certain number of questions, you may not go all the way to 150 questions. You could answer 100 or 110 or 120 questions, and the exam engine says, boom, done. You have answered enough of these tough questions correctly. You have passed the exam. We don't even need to show you the remaining 30 or 35 questions. It is always a very pleasant surprise when that happens. If you are in 149 or 150 questions, don't panic. It does not mean that you have failed the exam. And the benefit of taking the exam now in this computer adaptive format is, you know, immediately at the end of the exam, it takes about a minute, right there sitting at that workstation in the test center. It may be the longest 60 seconds of your life, but you will know that you have passed or failed the exam. It took weeks for me to figure out that I had actually passed the exam in the old paper-based version. So your exam will be proctored by somebody who is specifically trained to proctor that exam. They know what to look for. They know how to shut down cheaters on the exam. They know how to give you exactly what you need to get this done. Let me show you just a few more things from this section, and then we are going to send you on a break. Let you walk around, refresh yourself. There's some access control policies that you would need to know on the exam. We start with administrative policies, and we back these up with technical policies. Standards for complexity of passwords, procedures for getting somebody into a system and locking them out if there are bad attempts, good username, bad password, 3 times in a row usually will shut somebody down. But that's a matter of policy that we can enforce through group policies in the typical Windows domain. And by the way, it's not always about Windows. There's a variety of operating systems that you need to know a few things about. That 3 strikes you're out, where there's a good username and a bad password, is not necessarily somebody trying to attack that system. It could be a user was forced to change their password and they just didn't write it down. They didn't memorize their password, so we may have to rescue that user. For our administrator accounts, we want multiple factors of authentication. Be careful, keystroke logging and other mischief could happen, and your password can get away from you. That is bad, bad news. Identity management. is that process of controlling how users and entities get recognized in systems, account names, passwords, profiles, access rights. You may have tasks like assigning and changing user access. We're not suggesting, again, that a security manager is personally involved in this all the way down to the desktop. The key to success of the CISSP is thinking like a manager. So you're probably not answering password change requests and similar techie chores, but you should maintain some oversight of the process. So we'll call that the I&A process, identification and authentication, generally considered at the same time. So we'll call it I&A. Authorization follows quickly behind. And if we're doing our jobs correctly, all of this is transparent to the end user. There's no non-technical user in your network who should be able to look at that system and say, I have authenticated by providing my identity, and now I am being authorized to do this thing. Nope, it all happens in just a few seconds, and we maintain a little bit of mystery about how this happens. We'll use a variety of types of identification cards, badges, the common access card that we use in some of the federal services, RFID tags. Careful, please, with MAC addresses and IP addresses as identifiers. This is a thing that has been testable on the exam for quite some time. It is the idea that the MAC address, MAC, not like a Macintosh, but MAC for mandatory access control. This is a set of numbers and letters. It's hexadecimal numbering, so it's base 16. You have a 48-bit identifier. It is 6 bytes long. And once upon a time, in some of the old school network cards, back in the era when you would actually pop the top on a system and drop a network card in, a peripheral card, we would have found those MAC addresses burned in to those circuits at the factory. Or if you bought a desktop or laptop PC that had the network card built in, just coming off of the system board, not an add-on piece of product, that would have a burned in MAC address that we would assume was solid and stable for the lifespan of the product. These days, our MAC addresses are not burned into the circuitry, or if they are, they're easily changeable. We tend to set MAC addresses in software these days. So if we can set a legitimate MAC address for a network interface like Ethernet or Wi-Fi, it's also possible that somebody with some mischief in mind could change the MAC address. And there is a rather common technique mentioned on your exam. And yeah, this is testable. It's going to be in everybody's CISSP exam. The idea of MAC filtering. It's usually in the context of Wi-Fi. You can also do this in your Ethernet switch. We give that common connection point, like a wireless access point or an Ethernet switch, a list of MAC addresses. So we're telling that switch, or we're telling the wireless access point, only allow these MAC addresses to get access to the network. We want to keep personal devices off of the Wi-Fi, but we will allow company-owned laptops and tablets and smartphones and the Wi-Fi. Well, that's easy. We just compile a list of MAC addresses for authorized devices or the Ethernet cards in the desktop PCs, and we tell that device, let these in, keep all others out. And the switch says, okay, I'll do what I'm told. I will follow this list, follow these instructions. Works beautifully until somebody spoofs a MAC address. We could use utilities like Nmap to figure out those MAC addresses from a distance. You could even just get access to a workstation. Somebody walks away from their workstation in 10 seconds. You could type in ipconfig at the command line and you could see the MAC address. ipconfig with the all switch would get that done. In some cases, you might even see a tag, a physical representation of the MAC address applied to the product when it left the factory. Okay, so there's a variety of ways to get MAC addresses from devices. Now it's really easy to spoof the identity of that device. So when you take the exam, and it's not just CISSP, this is something you would see in your CompTIA exams like Security Plus, the Cybersecurity Analyst exam, Pen Test Plus, similar credentials. This will even be in your Microsoft exams and your Cisco exams. They're all in on it. They all want you to know MAC address filtering is a good thing to do, but it's not a complete solution. If we think we are protecting our networks only by doing MAC address filtering, this is awful. There will be a compromise. Somebody will figure out how to spoof a MAC address. IP addresses can also be spoofed if we're using RFID tags for employee identifiers. Those things can be spoofed as well. There are devices that would allow you to clone an RFID tag. Good luck cloning the common access card that we use in some of the federal services. I was involved in a project where we tried to get that done, not out of any malicious intent, obviously, but as part of an assessment of vulnerability. And good luck. Uncle insists on some pretty solid encryption in your common access cards. And you wouldn't do that on the job, obviously. So it's usually a pretty solid identifier as long as you have it with you at the appropriate time. If somebody walks away from their workstation with the common access card in the card reader, usually there is some ceremony involved with getting that back. You'll find it dangling from the ceiling by your lanyard, or somebody takes that opportunity to send a love letter to the captain, which would be seen as coming from that user who left the card in the card reader. So we've got to smack people down when they do that. All right. I want to show you a little more content from another domain, security testing and assessment. This one's fun when we do this in class because we get to play hacker. We put you in some simulations and we take a hands-on approach to testing and assessment. This is the kind of thing that you would get involved in as an information security manager, not necessarily doing the black box penetration test, which is the one that mimics the behavior of the criminal hacker from the outside. You might be involved in the white box penetration test. That's the one that mimics the role of the skilled insider, like the geek gone wild, the rogue administrator. What damage could one of your colleagues do to your network if they had malicious intent and they had a high level of technical skill? So we do have to simulate this a variety of ways. You generally would hire a contractor or a vendor to do that penetration test of your network from the outside, which is a form of assessment. I would certainly recommend that you hire a certified ethical hacker. You may even be aware of that credential. Perhaps we've even seen you in that class or you're pursuing it on your own. That does not come from ISE Squared, the CISSP folks. Certified ethical hacker comes from EC Council, a similar organization. And that's another one of those classes where we could have you come to us. We can do this online live, or we could even take that class to you and do that in your organization. So in a CISSP class, we will drill you on types of security assessments, talk about the details of these, the way that they would be represented on the exam, show you some security test strategies, what we actually do with the data, because it's extremely important that you protect the information that's generated in any type of security assessment. Imagine you have done a vulnerability assessment in your organization, not the full-scale network penetration test from the outside, but you get some smart software to assist you. You get Nessus or Core Impact, you get OpenVAS, which is free and awesome. You fire up that software, you let it crawl the network, let it take its time, pack a lunch, it's going to take a while, and eventually that software reports back to you, hey, admin, we found these vulnerabilities in this workstation. This has not been patched recently, or there is some security setting that has been turned off. There is some group policy that did not kick in. So you've got this dangerous condition in this workstation. Great. How many workstations do you have? 1,000. Okay, it's going to take a while. We're going to trust the software to crawl the network, show us the vulnerabilities, and then we will manually verify those vulnerabilities. If you're an old timer like me, or Dan, or William, you remember a guy named Reagan, and you remember a guy named Gorbachev. And as Reagan said to Gorbachev, trust but verify. And they were talking about nuclear weapons, or nuclear, as we say in Tennessee. So that's what we're going to do with our software that helps us get a handle on the state of security in our network. Buy that pro license for Nessus if you've got the budget for that. It's about $2,000. If you don't have that in your budget, you can use an open source flavor of the same type of software that's called OpenVAS. And we'll show you that in a minute. So we're going to trust our software to show us where the vulnerabilities are, and then we're going to manually verify the vulnerabilities, and we are going to do something about those vulnerabilities with a sense of urgency before criminal hackers and others with malice in mind get to leverage the vulnerabilities. And you must do that with a sense of urgency when your software tells you there is an issue that you have to take care of. So the real danger zone is before you have an opportunity to correct the vulnerabilities that you found. somebody takes advantage of those vulnerabilities. And usually that's somebody in your network, and it may even be a technologist who has gone rogue and has gotten access to your security test data. So lock that stuff down, please. Only a few people should have the authority to fire up that software and scan for vulnerabilities. Now, when I say a few people, clearly more than one. Don't let yourself become a single point of failure. So we tend to use a two-person rule. Last time I did this stuff at Vandenberg Air Force Base, they introduced me to a beautiful term, which I did not understand was used all over the Air Force. They call it two-person integrity. Whoa, I love that. Two-person integrity. You check my work and I check your work, and we keep each other honest, and we make sure that we are following some standards and procedures and guidelines and best practices. So you and an equally qualified administrator would typically be involved in doing this as a team to make sure it gets done correctly and we don't miss anything important. So with a sense of urgency, you protect that data and you follow up on those vulnerabilities. And we call that on the exam test output. You have administrative test output, you have technical assessment test output. The goal is to get a list of vulnerabilities, which really is the search for data. And please do not confuse this with the network penetration test. Totally different set of circumstances. Hire a certified ethical hacker, please, if you're responsible for testing perimeter security and similar things. You want to know what damage could be done. That starts with the vulnerability assessment, but you know too much about your network. You can't really play that role of the criminal hacker on the outside of your network who has to do phases of profiling and reconnaissance. That's why you hire certified ethical hackers as contractors. This is why you hire people who have the Pen Test Plus credential from CompTIA. And you may know CompTIA from Security Plus, Network Plus, and similar credentials. Perhaps you have those in your background as well. So we are going to scan for vulnerabilities with a variety of tools, and there is a point in the CISSP class where we introduce you to some tools of the trade. And one of the things that we love seeing in a CISSP class, when we get to a big list of software, we do some demonstrations with Nessus and Nmap and Wireshark and similar products. The very pleasant surprise is people say, oh yeah, we use that already. I know how to use Wireshark. I know how to use Nmap. I know how to use all the tools in Kali Linux because we use this all the time in scanning for vulnerabilities. So I'm going to drop a link on you. Let's see if I have the ability. I may have to reclaim the host role. No, I think I can actually do this from here. I'm going to drop a link into your chat window, invite you to pull this up at your convenience, bookmark that perhaps. If you have not already seen this, go take a look over at sechtools.org, where you find the top 125 network security tools as voted on by security geeks like us. Anybody can participate in the survey. And this is one dude, really smart guy named Gordon Lyon in real life. Fyodor is what we call him in the ethical hacker community. And for many years, Fyodor has put this survey out, and he invites you to participate in this. And so it's just all of us who do security for a living answer the survey, and he ranks the tools of the trade. And for many years, this tool called Wireshark has been at the top of the list. It is free, it is open source, it is awesome. It is a remarkable tool that we use for packet sniffing and protocol analysis, and it will really allow you to do that deep dive into what's happening where in your network, sorting these things by protocol, by port, by service, by source or destination IP addresses. It is amazing. Well, it's amazing for us who do vulnerability assessments. It is also amazing for the criminal hacker who gets their hands on this tool. It could be used against you. So if you are doing software audits in your network, and I hope you are, and you find Wireshark, you find Nmap, you find John the Ripper or some other well-known password cracking utility, you find those tools on the desktop of the mild-mannered accountant who has nothing to do with administering your network, you've got hackers, friends, or at least you've got some misdirection. The really skilled attacker is not going to install any of this stuff on a computer associated with them inside the network. They will compromise the desktop PC of somebody who would not recognize Wireshark or any of these other tools. And that's why we want you to be involved in software audits. If you're responsible for security in that network, you should know exactly what belongs on every desktop according to job function. You get some smart software to assist you in this process of finding the things that are not authorized. And then we have to go have that unpleasant conversation with the user about why they are running unauthorized software. And we can solve a lot of this trauma in advance by insisting on policies that do not allow people to install anything. Somebody's going to download software from a peer-to-peer file sharing site, or they're going to say, my idiot nephew showed me how to use a torrent, whatever that is, or I have this software at home. I am going to bring it in and install it. You're going to have licensing issues if people bring consumer software into your business environment. We don't want you to get in trouble. So when in doubt, lock them out. You need to know how to use these tools. The confused and concerned end user in your network does not know how to use these tools, and we need to keep it that way. So Wireshark, Metasploit, Nessus, Snort, AirCrack for testing your Wi-Fi security. There's a great set of tools here. Some of these are free. They're all awesome if they appear on the big list at sectools.org. And if this looks familiar to you, this purple wraparound framework, it might be because you are familiar with Nmap. In fact, there is a certain point in the CISSP class where you get some homework. We tell you on a network where you have the authority to install software, like your home network, or maybe on the job, assuming the appropriate permissions, we want you to actually go download and install Nmap. We want you to download and install Wireshark and a few of these other tools that are free, because you are going to see these things on the exam. I'll put money on it. I'll bet you any quantity of money that you are willing to agree to, you will be tested on Nmap. You are going to see a screenshot in your CISSP exam, Security Plus, Pen Test Plus, Certified Ethical Hacker, across a variety of exam vendors. They all want you to know about Nmap, and they usually give you a screenshot. Well, since Nmap is free, open source, always has been, always will be free, it is fair to ask you about Nmap in this exam. So if I'm looking at this screenshot of Nmap, I'm not sure how much detail you can make out over on your end, but friends, this is trouble. Look at the ports that are open in this thing that has been scanned. Port 80 is open, but port 443 is not open. Whoops. So we allow unencrypted traffic to and from the World Wide Web. That's allowed through the firewall, but the encrypted version, HTTPS, is not allowed. That's awful. Nobody should be able to use a credit card or anything of any value through that firewall. If this is the case, this is just nasty. There's an old busted port 25 SMTP, a rather primitive early protocol associated with email. And we don't see the more up-to-date version of that. This is bad, bad news. A variety of ports that are known to be vulnerable. If I'm the criminal hacker in this case, looking at your network through Nmap, jackpot. I know exactly where the vulnerabilities are. Game on. We are going to go leverage those vulnerabilities. So something like the Certified Ethical Hacker exam would put you in the role of the attacker. The CISSP tends to put you in the role of the defender. The whole point is that you need to run Nmap against your network before the criminal hacker runs Nmap against your network. So that's why we give you homework in those classes. We tell you to go get Wireshark, get Nmap, get OpenVAS, similar utilities, because those things will be testable on your exam. I would say start here at sectools.org for the top 125 tools of the trade. A few more things from this little domain. We have to make the distinction between vulnerability scanning and penetration testing. We've mentioned it before. We're going to say it again. This is so important. If it is going to be that true black box type of penetration test, you generally do not do this yourself, because it's going to be difficult for you to mimic the behavior of the criminal attacker who knows nothing about your organization. The real attacker will go through phases of profiling and reconnaissance. They will use social engineering. They will try to interact with your employees in some way through fake email. fake phone calls with spoofed caller ID. They will interact with your employees through social media. The LinkedIn request that you were not expecting. Well, this appears to be a well-connected person in my industry. Sure, I'll click that button. I'll connect to that person on LinkedIn, and they may actually be a criminal hacker trying to figure out some things about your organization and figure out things about the technology used by your organization. So a good use of your time as the CISSP who takes that security management role, you need to be prepared to do some spoofing. You could do this yourself, or you could hire somebody to do this. Uh, how do we determine that our employees will be resistant to phishing attacks through email? You phish them, or you pay somebody to phish your employees. Send those bogus emails that look real. Make those connections through social media that are not real. Spoof caller ID. You can do that for 20 bucks to get the app that allows you to spoof caller ID. It's called Spoof Card, and you just top it off like a prepaid cell phone. Game on. And so you can run the exploits. There may be some trust issues, so you might hire somebody to do that. As we prep for the actual penetration test, you ask questions like, who will commission the test? Who will conduct it? How will the test be conducted? What are the limitations? What tools will be used? Yeah, you're always quizzed on the tools of the trade in the CISSP exam. Who on the client side would be available in case of an accident, or somebody even misinterprets the purpose of the test and law enforcement gets involved. Whoops, it happens sometimes when we have to do the physical version of the penetration test. So we tend to work through a methodology, starting with reconnaissance, scanning, exploitation, maintaining access, and ultimately reporting to management on what we found and guidance on fixing what we found. The penetration tester who works as a consultant or contractor doing that true black box test especially does not stick around to actually fix the vulnerabilities that were found. It's up to internal personnel to do that. So as the CISSP, you are very likely to be the recipient of the penetration testing report. And we mix it up a variety of ways with this color code. The black box test is the one that's most effective at the real world evaluation. It does take the most time and effort because of the amount of reconnaissance that has to be done. The white box simulates the rogue insider, the geek gone wild. The gray box is a halfway approach. You get some, but not all of the necessary information provided. So the gray box pen test might be, we're looking for vulnerabilities in the web server, and we will contract you to scan for vulnerabilities, see if you can exploit any vulnerabilities in the web server. And the URL is this, www.ourawesomecompany.com. Okay, give me some IP addresses, give me some DNS information. Tell me about the software that is used in the web server. What flavor? Is it the Apache web server? Is it, the Windows web server, IIS? And the company would say, you're the hacker, you tell us. We have told you the URL, and we can tell you this much. We're hosting this in-house. We're not using a web hosting service. All of the other information is up for grabs. You need to figure out the DNS information, the IP address information. You need to figure out what software we're running. Nmap would typically tell you that, and then look for those vulnerabilities. So that halfway approach is called the gray box approach. So again, exam alert, since they're going to always give you an option set on this exam of 4 things at a minimum. A, B, C, D, multiple choice is the typical format of a question on CISSP. I've got 3 things here. So as you go through the material, if you're in class with us or if you're doing some self-study, always look for these things in groups of 3 and assume an additional answer will be provided, and it is going to be a bogus made-up answer. So if you get a question about pen testing, they'll say, black box, white box, gray box, blue box, red box. They'll just make up some other goofy thing and throw that in to confuse you and mislead you. Those are called distractor answers. So in a typical CISSP class, we would walk you through pen test components and demonstrate some of those things: network scanning, social engineering. The difference between blind testing and targeted testing is always mentioned on the test. If it's the blind test, the people who work in that organization are not aware that it's a test, because we're checking the human element as well. We're looking for vulnerabilities in people's awareness. How do your network administrators respond when what appears to be a malicious denial of service attack is happening, or it appears that someone's trying to get physical access to your facility, how do your security guards respond? This is not just about information security, because you are, as a CISSP, that internal consultant to management on all security matters. You really are expected to have awareness of social engineering and some of the psychological aspects. You are expected to participate in assessments of physical security, even safety issues. The general rule is people first, staff before stuff. If we lose a server, we can replace that. If we lose a person, we have a much bigger issue. So the exam generally will give you a sample of a log. Could be a Windows log, could be from a Linux or Unix type of system, and you will have to do some analysis of what you see in that log and reach some conclusions that something either should or should not have happened, and you will have to follow up on that. So we would give you some good general advice on system security control with general security testing, where you test administrative controls, logical controls, physical controls, focus down to vulnerability assessments. And again, this is not a pure manual process. You start with smart software. In fact, a utility. In fact, I'll give you some homework. If you're going to show up in a CISSP class, I promise I am going to ask that you download OpenVAS. Just do a quick Google search on that, or just go to openvas.org. And yeah, bit of a head start on your homework. Download and install OpenVAS in a network where you have the permission to install software, and it will show you some fascinating things. It goes workstation to workstation, server to server, really all of the network interfaces that it can contact in your network. It will show you where the vulnerabilities are, and then you would go and manually follow up to validate what the software has told you. We don't just trust the software to do this. Pen testing, as compared with vulnerability assessment, generally done from outside the network by a contractor or a vendor. Friends, there is some serious cheese to be had for people who get good at penetration testing. That's one of those occupations where you tend to write your own ticket. There's enough work out there to keep a lot of us busy in pen testing. You would certainly be prepared to do log review on the exam as well. Like I just said, they're going to give you a screenshot of a log, and you have to interpret what you see in that log. In the real world enterprise environment, in a big healthy company with a healthy profit motive and a lot of money to spend, you may have a security information and event management system helping you with that analysis of all of this information from massive collections of things that got logged. A smaller organization, maybe with a smaller budget, maybe a government environment, maybe a nonprofit environment, you might not have the money for the license for Splunk or Alien Vault or similar products. So in that case, you would be on your own for some log review. Again, we use the two-person rule. If we're doing reviews of logs, I'm going to have a colleague with me. I'm going to have a partner in this. We call it two-person, the rule, or the two-person integrity. You check my work, I check your work. You might see something that I missed in my review of the log, and vice versa. So the exam will want you to know about some common vulnerabilities and some common exploits. You may be familiar with some of these already. There's a nice chunk of the text that breaks down exactly what's happening in these. And some of these predictably are on the exam. I would assume at this phase in your career, you have heard of SQL injection. SQL is structured query language. It's what makes our relational database management systems work, a way that we structure queries. It is vulnerable. There is a big list published by OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project. It's called the Top 10. And SQL injection shows up at the top of the list over and over again. In fact, all injection attacks generally are at the top of that list because they are so prevalent and they can cause a significant amount of damage. You would see things like cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgery on the exam as well. And typically there would be an effort to confuse you and mislead you about the difference between those two. Let me show you a couple of more things from an additional domain here, the security operations domain. Stand by just a sec for this to appear. There we are. A focus on personnel safety is always going to be a part of your exam. Remember, you are that internal consultant on a variety of security matters. Management is counting on you to know this stuff. So we focused on the safety and security of the human element of the business. Get yourself and your colleagues to safety, please. If your facility is not safe to work in, we have to balance that need with the need for privacy. All individuals will have some expectation of privacy. In a corporate environment, I would not expect to see video surveillance in a restroom. I would not expect to see video surveillance in a locker room where somebody changes into a uniform. But other than that, out in hallways and common areas and the area coming into the building, employee parking lots, we're generally going to see video surveillance devices. So before getting involved in that, for making any of those types of decisions, consult with your corporate legal advisor on what is not just allowed by law, but what is acceptable. Your corporate legal advisor is paid to keep the company out of legal trouble. So please follow their guidance. When your employees travel, when it is safe to travel, they should be discouraged from taking sensitive information with them. If we have to take sensitive information out on the road or in air travel, let's make sure that stuff is encrypted, please. Use your encryption, use strict security settings, beware of technical gifts. Oh, this is nasty when this goes bad. Your CEO at SPIFCO International goes to a trade show or a conference. They go to a convention and they come back so excited. Look, I got the new Android tablet. This was a gift from a vendor, or I dropped my business card in the fishbowl. And wouldn't you know, they picked me to win this awesome gift. It's the premium Android tablet with the cellular connection and 5G and Wi-Fi and all of that. Can you get this on the network, please, Chief? Nope, not happening. Not until we check that device out very, very thoroughly. I'm going to put Wireshark in place and see what this device is talking to. The unexpected technical gift is always suspicious. When your CEO believes they have dropped their business card into that fishbowl at the convention and it was chosen at random, probably not. Those marketing folks are going to flip through those business cards and they are going to get that gift into the CEO's hand deliberately. That's the dirty little secret of trade shows. So yeah, check those devices out very thoroughly. They may be compromised. And this is an ugly phenomenon, but we do have to discuss it. The idea of duress. Should you and I ever be in the same place at the same time, ask me about the worst day at work that I have ever had. It was the day the bank got robbed, and this was awful. And we had some lingering security issues because of that. And so we came up with a duress code that our bank employees could say to each other to indicate, I think we're in trouble. I think the bank is about to get robbed. So the idea behind duress is that a person under threat of harm does things that they ordinarily would not do when these circumstances can spin out of control. So the CISSP body of knowledge, again, it's this, and we introduce this to you in class, gives you some good advice about how to deal with those duress situations and some of the things that we can do to protect our colleagues. One other image from this little domain. I appreciate these folks doing what they do. I don't choose these images that come in the courseware. This comes to us from our courseware provider, but I appreciate this image and I appreciate those folks having a tough day at work on the deck of a carrier, clearly putting out a fire in an expensive piece of aircraft with a sense of urgency. There would be incident response management techniques in place. As a CISSP, you would typically be called upon to review incident management techniques and improve upon those techniques. I think everybody in this group would be familiar with the idea of the after action review, the AAR. You've probably seen that in a military context. Well, in the civilian world, we will call that the lessons learned review. If our team has had to respond to an incident, typically with a CISSP as the leader of that team, we get together after that incident and we ask, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? What can we do better next time around? And you get those things in writing for the benefits of the team the next time and anybody else who has to be involved in that effort. I'm looking at the time that is available for the rest of this. I know we have to have time for some questions. I want to show you one little thing from one other domain toward the end of the slide deck. It is here, just a few words about cryptography. And I mentioned earlier that cryptography topics are all over the CISSP exam, they will beat you up with two different flavors of cryptography, symmetric and asymmetric cryptography. So if we're seeing this in a military context or some other government context, usually the focus is confidentiality. You might have a secret security clearance, which would allow you to see some of the secret information. You could not see all of the secret information because it's based on need to know, and you should not see any of the top secret information if you have a secret clearance. Great, we get the clearances right, but what if somebody does get exposure to something they are not supposed to see in that classified system? Well, we will back up that classified system with encryption. We are going to lock things down, even when we should be reasonably assured that only authorized people are seeing the things that they're supposed to see, and they're not seeing things they're not supposed to see. This can get away from us very quickly if there's a violation. So we take the additional step of encrypting the sensitive material. Over on the commercial side, it's not about confidentiality as much as it is about integrity. We're trying to reduce the likelihood that unauthorized changes are made to information. If you are in a retail environment over on the corporate side, and you have a retail salesperson who gets paid on commission. All right, so the retail salesperson figures out that there's a vulnerability in the system that accounts for retail sales. Rather than selling 1,000 widgets, they can move some inventory around to make it look like they have sold 5,000 widgets or 10,000 widgets, and they don't even have to move inventory. If they can get access to that accounting system, they'll just make up widgets. And by the time we figure it out through proper product inventory, the widgets never got sold by this salesperson. The salesperson has already earned the commission and they're out the door. They've moved on to some other job. Whoops. And all of this happened because someone was able to make an unauthorized entry in that accounting system. So that goal in the commercial environment is not confidentiality as much as it is integrity. One of the other values that we get from good cryptography is non-repudiation. This is all about holding people responsible for their actions. Somebody should not be able to send that naughty, harassing email and then claim, I didn't do that. Somebody else did this. I didn't do that. Okay, well, you were present. You logged in. We used a biometric credential. You had your common access card. We had video surveillance. We had reliable eyewitness testimony. We have a variety of things that place that person at the keyboard at the time the naughty deed was done. It'll be very difficult for them to repudiate their action. One more thing from this little section, and we'll open it up for some questions. You do on this exam need to know the difference between symmetric and asymmetric encryption. They're going to nail you on this. Symmetric encryption implies that we will use cryptographic keys. It's a shared secret at that point. We come up with a number or some other value that could be reduced to a number, and we share this information between the two or more people who need to decrypt the encrypted information. So since it's the same key used on both sides, it is considered symmetric encryption. DES and triple DES and AES that we spoke about earlier would be forms of symmetric. You have to compare this to asymmetric encryption. This is the type that we use in public key infrastructure. So the typical scenario on the exam might be you have to set up confidential communication between your company's CEO and a legal advisor on the outside of the company. Wait a minute, Chief, before you fire up that email, let me call my counterpart over at that law firm. And what we will do as technologists, we will generate public keys and private keys for these participants. And then once these massive numbers are generated, I will give that person my boss's public key, and they will give me that attorney's public key. We always keep the private keys private, and if this is done properly, we have now set up a system where those two people can communicate securely with each other, and even if somebody intercepts that message, they would not be able to make any sense out of it because they do not have the private keys. If the private keys get away from you, this is a disaster. We must cancel those keys immediately, and then we have to regenerate those keys. So if you take the class, we will wear you out about encryption, and we're going to do that because the exam is going to wear you out about encryption. All right, I see that Jesse has popped up in the upper right corner. When that happens on cop shows, they call it a clue. I think we're going to go ahead and open this up for questions.
Yeah, definitely. We want to take some questions. I know that there still is a little bit of time left to answer any questions that you have about specific material, specific content. I know that James, you're studying for the test that you have on Sunday. If there's anything that we can help get answered for you, now would be the time. I also see that Dan, you're in here. I was gonna see if I'm going to allow you to talk if you want to take yourself off of mute. And I know you have a number of people in here that you're familiar with that you know. Is there anything that you want to share with us?
Well, I think the, over the 22 years I've been here, I think CISSP started kicking up in my neighborhood around 2003, especially in the DoD
And you're in
space.
Tucson, right?
Right. But with, I think Fort Huachuca was my introduction to CISSP and trying to get our arms around it and so forth. A few years later, we became an authorized provider. Over the years, those that have had a more successful journey along this path, the training begins way before the class. And one of the things that a lot of our programs include is to get access or to gain access. Most of our classes are recorded for up to 6 months from the date of the live class. And we try to issue a recorded class to that student this month who may be attending a class in late March or April, giving them the opportunity to familiarize themselves more in depth with the content, to generate a list of questions where if you're attending Dennis's class or any of our other instructors' classes, this is the perfect venue for vetting those questions. And that's what you need to use that time for. You pay for the class, you're paying for those answers, for that clarity from the expert or from the instructor. So training begins way before the class. If you're expecting to pass the exam by starting your training event on day one of a live class, it's gonna be tough.
That's well said. And if anybody is looking to connect with Dan about the CISSP class, I know that Kathy, Hector, Theophilus, Anthony, you guys are all out in the Tucson area. You can connect with Dan. You can chat your information, Dan, and I think I have everybody's email address already, so we'll get you connected. James is saying that he just needs to lean into the CISSP way, just like Dennis had said, from a management perspective and not a sys admin. Dennis,
Yeah.
so I think your words are speaking true to heart here.
Absolutely. You are the internal consultant on security matters when you have that real life position of the CISSP. So on the exam, consider yourself in a consulting assignment. Imagine somebody is employing you for 3 hours to go give them some good advice on security matters. That's what the exam is. It is a 3-hour exam. If you go all the way through to the end of the 3 hours, and you are going to answer about 100 to 150 tough questions. So imagine yourself in the exam in a consulting assignment. If somebody offered you a big chunk of cash to go to their organization and answer 100 to 150 security questions about information security, physical security, personnel security. Would you do that? Absolutely. So that's the mind frame on the exam. You think like a manager, and really the payoff is thinking like the consultant to management. Mentally, you've got to get out of the server room. You've got to get off the help desk, and you've got to see this at a higher level. And I say that with all due respect to people who work on help desk and do tech support. That's how I got started in all of this. If you can get that credential, that is your ticket out of that pure technical environment and into the ranks of management of these processes. So, normally, we would say the best of luck to you, but if you are well prepared, you do not need luck You don't generally knock CISSP out of the park because you have taken a 5-day class with me or anybody else. I top off your knowledge and I give you a variety of resources. You do have to put a significant amount of self-study effort into this. People who believe they're going to memorize brain dumps and pass a CISSP will generally be disappointed. It's a much more intensive process. So that's why not only do we put you in class, we give you homework. We say, go install Wireshark, install Nmap, install OpenVAS, and run those things because they are going to be testable. So we can, I know we're running short on time, but to
Dennis,
bounce
we had
off of
one more
Dan
question
said, yeah,
that's
go ahead.
coming from Marshall on Zoom. They're asking, what's the prerequisite to take the CISSP course? I don't know if that's best answered by you or one of our account executives, but what is the prerequisite?
There is no official prerequisite that we have internally. Your organization who sent you to our class might have a different requirement, but what we recommend as an unofficial prerequisite is that if you can come into a CISSP class with either CompTIA Security Plus or a body of knowledge from your experience, which is equivalent to Security Plus, you would tend to do quite well in this, because we do need a rather thorough grounding in the technology behind all of this. This is why people who have worked on the help desk and tech support, system administrators, tend to do quite well in the CISSP. If you've not had exposure to those technical topics, it's just more stuff that you have to learn. One thing that I would like to put out there, just in the interest of wrapping all of this up on time, bounce off of what Dan said about all of this. Yeah, come take a class. If that's not practical for you to be physically present with us in a class, this could be done in the online live environment. Pops up on my schedule many, many times a year. And when it is safe to travel, we can even take this class to you if you need a more concentrated approach of this, or if you would just be more comfortable in your comfortable network environment. If there's a group of people in your company all studying for CISSP at the same time, like we see in some of the military environments, sure, Dan will put me on a plane and send me to your place, and we'll take the courseware, we'll take the goodies, and we'll get it done in your comfortable and familiar environment.